Okay, TB Nation, it's finally time to talk about Joe Rogan. While some have warned me to stay away from this topic altogether, the truth must come out. While Joe Rogan might currently be one of the most famous personalities in the world, it appears no one has spotted the truth that's been sitting there all along. So everyone knows Joe's origin story of starting as a fighter, becoming a stand-up, and then landing a role on news radio that led to Fear Factor, and then his famous fight with Carlos Mencia, and then the rise of his podcast. And maybe it's because we live in an era where Halsey is a celebrated artist, but people don't seem to question how these figures rise to power. Well, if you saw the recent video leak of Halsey eating her own poop in some sort of radio ritual to obtain a #1 hit, you're probably starting to second guess everything you know. And while you might not know exactly why, the celebrity world does seem remarkably different ever since 2009. Well, that's exactly when the Magellan Corporation first started to use musical artists to pre-plant ad campaigns decades before products even launch. Now, you might remember this is the year where Kesha comes out of nowhere with a #1 hit called TikTok. And looking back, this was a severe turn. Just listen to her horrible singing and rapping, and we all just let it happen. And the truth about Joe Rogan is just as false. You see, it's true that Joe Rogan did get all the way to Fear Factor through his own merit, but the real reason Joe left Fear Factor has always been a secret. But he actually quit when he was diagnosed with MJC, or multifaceted joint condition. And this is a rare and life-threatening condition that eventually corrodes the cartilage around your joints, leading to the loss of mobility in your entire body. And you can imagine at the time getting diagnosed with this unknown disease had to be terrifying. Well, Joe was known enough in Hollywood that the Magellan Corporation found out about his life-threatening condition and swooped in. You see, Magellan had recently acquired Lockheed & Martin, and with their advanced technology, they could literally keep Joe alive and in well health. That is, if he was willing to sign a lifer, a contract that doesn't end. It's essentially Joe's iron lung. And so every insane health regimen you see Joe putting himself through is all just part of Magellan's daily treatment to keep Joe alive. And so while you might think Joe has some extreme opinions, you'd be entirely wrong, as Joe has never once voiced his real thoughts on his podcast. Everything he says is entirely scripted and fed through an earpiece. By now, Joe Rogan is closer to Patrick Stewart in First Contact becoming a Borg than he is to the free-spirited character you see him portray. He's like the new RoboCop, only his protocol is to disperse whatever agenda the Magellan Corporation tells him to. And if this sounds far-fetched, fine, go on believing that a guy from a gross-out reality show started a podcast where he smokes pot and talks shit, and it rose to the heights of presidential candidates fighting to appear on it. And for those thinking Joe Rogan is too much of a rebel to ever be tamed, you clearly don't know the scope of Magellan. Now, you probably already know this, but the Martin in Lockheed & Martin stands for Enrique Martin, or Ricky Martin's father. And you can imagine back in the early 2000s, this secretive weapons company didn't like the idea of the owner's son living La Vida Loco, but they tolerated it at the time because people didn't seem to connect the singer to the company. But once Magellan acquired Lockheed & Martin in 2009, they decided to make an example out of Ricky and used him to keep an eye on Joe in Project Rogan. That's right, the man you thought was Joey Diaz has been Ricky Martin in a fat suit all along, and Joe has no idea. This is the level that Magellan is willing to go to in order to control not only their prisoners, but their image. Now, how did I get all this info? Well, if you pay close attention, Joe has been sending out smoke signals for years. Now, you might have noticed Joe often repeats the same stories over and over again as if it's new information. So I put every episode of Joe's podcast through an algorithm to detect inconsistencies. And what I found blew my mind. You see, apparently every month, Joe Rogan will not only talk about the same stories, but he will repeat the same amount of times he says them. And here's the breakdown. The Roseanne Barr getting hit by a car story is mentioned 8 times per month. High-level problem solving with dire consequences gets mentioned 5 times per month. The electric cocoon butterfly metaphor gets mentioned 12 times per month. And of course, the time his friend retold him a Sam Kinison joke about getting fucked even after you're dead, Joe tells 16 times per month. 8, 5, 12, 16 every single month. And the alphabetical equivalence reveals the truth. Joe's been calling for help all along. You see, allegedly Project Rogan was moved to Texas to carry out Magellan's long-term plans with Joe. Now, you may remember at the time it took Joe multiple years to start a comedy club. Now, of course, these things do take time, but for the man who just signed the Spotify deal and moved to Texas expressly for this reason, it took a remarkably long time to open a simple comedy club. Well, I found these fire code records of Elon Musk's company having exclusive underground access in the building for over a year. And after paying an Austin-based Mexican gentleman via Cash App to shake down Casey Rocket, he was able to relay this insane information. Apparently, the comedy mothership mothership is exactly what it says it is. It's a comedy venue that's designed to take flight and travel to other planets. Now apparently the whole intention of this venue and Kill Tony is just to find middle acts that won't outshine them in the new world they're currently building on Mars. After all, there can only be a maximum of 300 comedians at any given time. And there's a lot more about this Voldemort-like barely living creature, but we'll have to save that for another time. For now, Joe Rogan, you're a total bitch. Okay everyone, if you're keeping track, Tony and the Geek Squad are hot on my trail. All I can think now is I hope they kill me, rather than make me listen to Hans Kim's stand-up about having sex with white girls. I jumped into the ocean and started swimming, but I noticed the forest fire ash covering my entire body doesn't seem to be coming off. Maybe it was the combination of sweat and melted gummy bears, but I have a sheen black layer all over my whole naked body that seems to be helping me swim 10 times faster than any other creature. And I was able to send out this video via a weather buoy that I was able to hack into and rewire, but that's when I saw them off in the distance. Jeremiah Watkins and the former Kill Tony band riding jet skis holding machetes. These guys wanted back on Kill Tony bad, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get there. It felt like a scene from a movie that should have been made. Waterworld 2. Well, I've got some swimming to do before these chuckle fucks take me out. TB Nation, I'm going into deep water. Please help spread this important and true news.